Tonight, we're turning our attention towards something most people never stop long enough to see. What if the habits you use to manage your emotions are the very things quietly keeping you from healing? Science has been building a careful answer to that question for decades. And that answer, it turns out, begins with you. Exactly as you are tonight. Exactly as you have always been. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Wherever you are right now, perhaps your body's still carrying the weight of a long day. Your thoughts still moving, even as the room has gone quiet. Allow yourself this particular kind of stillness. We'll move through 100 relaxing facts about emotional healing and the behaviors that interrupt it. From the neuroscience of what happens when we suppress a feeling, to the quiet biology of release, to the tender science of what the brain is actually waiting for when you finally let it rest. This kind of content reaches people who are carrying things they have not yet been able to set down. A gentle like, a subscribe, or sharing this with someone who needs a quieter night. It helps another tired mind find its way here. Every person who rests a little better because of this channel is exactly why we keep going. One healing night, one sleepy soul at a time. Let yourself settle completely now. Feel your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop just a little. You don't need to solve anything tonight. Sense that gradual loosening, like a room after the last guest has gone. Still, unheld. And finally, only yours. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're resting where the quietest rooms hold the most feeling. Let your mind soften into the depth it was always built for. And now, we begin. Emotions are not just feelings. They are full-body biological events. When an emotion arises, whether it is grief, anger, or fear, your brain triggers a coordinated physiological response involving your heart rate, muscle tension, hormone release, and immune function, the amygdala. A small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain initiates this cascade within milliseconds. Long before your conscious mind registers what is happening, researchers now understand that an emotion, once triggered, has a natural lifespan, a beginning, a peak, and an ending. The body is designed to move through it. The question this video explores is what happens when we stop that movement before it completes. The word emotion comes from the Latin emovere, meaning to move out, to stir, to set in motion. This etymology is not accidental. Emotions evolve not as states to be stored, but as signals designed to drive action. Fear moves you away from danger. Grief moves you toward connection and rest. Anger moves you toward a boundary that has been crossed. When an emotion is processed fully, the movement completes, and the nervous system returns to a baseline state. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what this ancient root suggested. Emotions are meant to pass through us, not settle inside us. The body has a built-in mechanism for completing the emotional cycle. It is called the stress response cycle, and it has been described across decades of psychobiology, research, and synthesized most accessibly by Emily and Amelia Nagoski in their influential work on burnout and the stress cycle. The cycle has 3 stages: activation, peak, and resolution. In animals, this cycle completes naturally. A gazelle escaping a predator will tremble and shake afterward. The body's way of discharging the adrenaline and cortisol that prepared it to survive. In humans, we tend to interrupt this process, suppressing the shaking, the crying, the resting, and that interruption is where the process stops before it is finished. One of the most common behaviors that interrupts emotional healing is rumination. Rumination is the repetitive, passive focus on symptoms of distress and their possible causes and consequences. It is not the same as problem solving, where problem solving is active and goal-directed. Rumination circles, returning to the same painful thought without forward movement. Research from Yale University and the University of Michigan has consistently shown that rumination prolongs depressive episodes, increases anxiety, and impairs the brain's ability to regulate emotion. It keeps the amygdala in a state of low-level activation, which means the emotional cycle never fully completes. The brain uses something called the default mode network when the mind is not focused on an external task. This network, active during rest and mind wandering, is also strongly associated with self-referential thought, thinking about yourself, your past, and your future. In people with healthy emotional regulation, the default mode network generates creative and restorative mental activity during rest. In people who ruminate frequently, neuroimaging studies show the default mode network becomes hyperactive, cycling through distressing narratives rather than allowing the brain to recover. What should be a resting state becomes another arena of emotional labor. Emotional suppression, the act of consciously inhibiting an emotional expression or experience, has measurable physiological costs. A landmark study by James Gross at Stanford University found that when people suppress an emotion, the subjective feeling does not disappear. Instead, the physiological activation associated with that emotion actually increases. The body is still responding, still tightening muscles, still generating the internal signals of distress. But the process is being blocked from completing its circuit. Over time, repeated suppression is associated with elevated blood pressure, impaired immune function, and reduced emotional clarity. The emotion does not go away. It redirects inward. Numbing is a related but distinct behavior, where suppression actively pushes an emotion down. Numbing is a kind of disconnection, a gradual withdrawal from emotional experience altogether. It often develops as an adaptive response in people who have experienced overwhelming or chronic emotional pain. Numbing can take many forms: excessive screen time, compulsive busyness, emotional overeating, or a persistent sense of flatness. Research from Brené Brown's lab at the University of Houston found a pattern that is both profound and quietly troubling. We cannot selectively numb emotions. When we numb the painful ones, we also mute the joyful ones. The nervous system operates along a spectrum, from activation to rest. At one end is the sympathetic state, high alert, ready for action, flooded with stress hormones. At the other end is the parasympathetic state, calm, restorative, the biological condition in which healing, digestion, and emotional processing occur. Many of the behaviors that interrupt emotional healing, rumination, suppression, numbing, relentless busyness, keep the nervous system tilted toward the activated end of that spectrum, even without an active threat present. The body never fully enters the parasympathetic state long enough for the emotional cycle to close. Sleep is one of the most important windows for emotional processing. During REM sleep, the stage characterized by rapid eye movements and vivid dreaming, the brain does something precise. The amygdala becomes highly active, while the brain simultaneously reduces levels of norepinephrine to their lowest point in the entire 24-hour cycle, lower even than in dreamless sleep or ordinary waking rest. Neuroscientist Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley describes this as the brain reprocessing emotional memories in a neurochemically calmer environment, experiencing the memory without its full physiological weight. This nightly recalibration is how difficult experiences lose their charge over time. When sleep is disrupted, this process cannot complete. So yes, this collection of behaviors, the ones we use to manage, avoid, or push through emotional pain, is already revealing itself as a pattern with real neurological consequences. What the science is beginning to show is that these behaviors do not protect us from emotional pain. They simply delay the processing that would resolve it, while quietly accumulating a biological cost in the body and brain. The behaviors that feel like survival strategies are often the same ones keeping us from arriving at the other side of what we feel. That is the first thread we are pulling tonight. Avoidance is one of the most thoroughly studied emotional behaviors in clinical psychology. It refers to any action taken to escape, reduce, or prevent contact with an uncomfortable emotional experience. Avoidance can be behavioral, leaving situations that trigger distress, or it can be cognitive, deliberately steering thoughts away from painful material. In the short term, avoidance provides genuine relief. The discomfort decreases. This is why it is reinforced. But in the longer term, avoidance prevents the brain from learning that the feared emotion is tolerable, and untolerated emotions remain charged, waiting beneath the surface. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with rational thinking, planning, and emotional regulation, plays a central role in how we respond to difficult feelings. When it is functioning well and in communication with the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex acts as a kind of gentle moderator. It receives the emotional signal, contextualizes it, and helps the person decide how to respond. But chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and unrelenting emotional suppression weaken this connection. Neuroimaging research shows that in people experiencing burnout or chronic emotional avoidance, prefrontal activity decreases while amygdala reactivity increases. The regulator grows quieter as the alarm grows louder. The body keeps a record. This phrase, drawn from psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma and somatic experience, reflects a well-established finding in psychophysiology. Emotional experiences, particularly those that were never fully processed, are encoded not only in memory, but in the body itself. Patterns of muscle tension, altered breathing rhythms, chronic low-grade inflammation, and dysregulated heart rate variability can all be physiological traces of unresolved emotional cycles. The body is simply being accurate. It is holding what the mind did not finish. Heart rate variability. The variation in time between consecutive heartbeats is one of the most sensitive physiological markers of emotional regulation available to researchers. High heart rate variability is associated with flexibility, resilience, and the capacity to move between emotional states with ease. Low heart rate variability is associated with emotional rigidity, chronic stress, and difficulty recovering from difficult feelings. Studies published in journals, including Biological Psychology and Frontiers in Neuroscience, have found that behaviors like rumination and emotional suppression are directly correlated with reduced heart rate variability. The heart, it turns out, reflects the emotional story of the nervous system with quiet accuracy. There is a behavior researchers call emotional over-control. It is different from healthy self-regulation, where healthy regulation allows emotions to be felt and then thoughtfully expressed. Over-control involves a persistent, effortful dampening of all emotional experience, including positive emotions. People who over-control tend to appear calm on the outside while carrying significant internal tension. Research from Russ Coates and Thomas Lynch on radically open dialectical behavior therapy found that over-control is associated with conditions including chronic depression, anorexia nervosa, and certain anxiety disorders. The cost of maintaining such tight internal management is exhaustion, a kind of emotional fatigue that accumulates beneath awareness. Emotional granularity is the ability to distinguish between different emotional states with precision. A person with high emotional granularity can differentiate between feeling disappointed, embarrassed, anxious, and sad, 4 states that might blur into one vague sense of unease for someone with lower granularity. Research by Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University found that people with higher emotional granularity recover from difficult emotional events more quickly, engage in fewer unhelpful behaviors, and show greater psychological resilience overall. Emotional vocabulary, it turns out, is not merely descriptive. It is biologically functional. Naming what you feel with precision activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala reactivity. This process, naming an emotion to reduce its intensity, is sometimes called affect labeling. A series of studies led by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA showed that when people verbally label a negative emotional experience, activity in the amygdala decreases and prefrontal activity increases. The simple act of saying or thinking the words "I feel sad" or "this is" grief shifts the brain's processing from reactive to reflective. It does not eliminate the feeling, but it changes the relationship to the feeling. And that shift, however small, that is the beginning of something the brain recognizes as safe enough to complete. Perfectionism is one of the less discussed emotional avoidance behaviors. At first glance, perfectionism appears to be about standards and achievement. But research from Paul Hewitt and Gordon Flett who have studied perfectionism for decades, shows that perfectionistic behavior often functions as an emotional protection strategy. If I get everything right, nothing painful can reach me. The relentless striving keeps the emotional body busy, focused outward, producing, achieving, and never settling long enough to feel what is underneath. When perfectionists stop, even briefly, they often report an uncomfortable surge of emotion that has no obvious cause. That surge is the cue of feelings that were never given their turn. Chronic busyness, the cultural habit of filling every available moment with activity, functions in a physiologically similar way to avoidance. Neuroscience research consistently shows that emotional processing requires idle time, unstructured, undirected mental space in which the default mode network can integrate experience and consolidate emotional memory. In cultures that treat busyness as a virtue and stillness as a failure, this integration time is rarely scheduled and rarely protected. The result is a population of people who are highly productive and emotionally unfinished, moving through their days, carrying a growing accumulation of experience that has not yet been digested. The concept of interoception, the body's ability to sense its own internal state, is central to understanding why these behaviors are so disruptive to emotional healing. Interoceptive awareness allows a person to notice the physical sensations associated with an emotion, the tightening in the chest, the heaviness in the limbs, the shift in breathing. Research by Sarah Garfinkel at the University of Sussex and others has shown that people with lower interoceptive awareness have greater difficulty identifying and regulating their emotions. The behaviors that numb, avoid, or suppress emotional experience also reduce interoceptive sensitivity over time, making the body's emotional signals progressively quieter and harder to read. Alcohol is one of the most socially accepted emotional numbing behaviors and one of the most disruptive to the emotional healing cycle. While alcohol does produce short-term reductions in anxiety and emotional discomfort, it significantly suppresses REM sleep, the very stage in which the brain processes and recalibrates emotional memories. Research from the Sleep Research Society shows that even moderate alcohol consumption before sleep reduces REM duration and increases emotional reactivity the following day. The feelings that were numbed in the evening return the next morning, often more present than before, while the brain's overnight processing window has been narrowed. Social withdrawal is another behavior that commonly interrupts emotional healing. Despite feeling protective in the moment, humans are neurobiologically deeply social creatures. The presence of a trusted other, even a silent presence, activates the ventral vagal complex, a branch of the vagus nerve associated with feelings of safety, calm, and social engagement. Researcher Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory, has shown that co-regulation, the physiological soothing that occurs between people in safe social contact, is not optional for optimal emotional recovery. It is a biological need. Isolation removes access to this regulatory mechanism at precisely the moment the nervous system most needs it. Projection is a well-documented psychological defense mechanism in which difficult internal emotional states are unconsciously attributed to other people. A person feeling resentful may believe others are angry at them. A person carrying shame may interpret neutral interactions as critical. Projection is not a character flaw. It is a survival behavior that the psyche deploys when a feeling is too uncomfortable to be experienced directly. But projection also prevents the person from recognizing the emotion as their own, which means the processing cycle cannot begin at the source. The feeling remains unacknowledged and therefore unresolved. Intellectualization is a related defense. The tendency to engage with an emotional experience primarily through analysis and cognitive distance, rather than feeling it directly. Someone who intellectualizes may understand their grief in precise detail, its cause, its stages, its psychological mechanisms, but they remain, somehow, standing slightly outside the grief itself. Intellectualization is frequently found in people with high cognitive ability, where the mind is skilled enough to construct elaborate frameworks that effectively keep raw feeling at arm's length. The framework becomes another form of avoidance, more sophisticated, but serving the same function. These observations, taken together, reveal a pattern that the science has been quietly assembling for decades. The behaviors that appear most rational, most responsible, most manageable, the staying busy, the staying in your head, the staying composed, are often the behaviors that carry the highest cost for emotional recovery. They do not resolve the emotional cycle, they postpone it, redirect it, and gradually accumulate its weight in the body and the nervous system. By this point in our journey, the central question is already beginning to answer itself. The path toward healing does not require more management. It requires something much closer to stopping. Right now, your brain is sorting today, deciding what matters, what can be released. You don't need to do anything. It knows how. Every system in your body is working without your instruction. Your heart is moving blood through chambers. It has navigated millions of times. Your breath is deepening on its own. The emotions you encountered today are already being filed, gently, by structures older than language. You only need to stay here, still, and allow the process you cannot see to do what it has always known how to do. Now we continue. The window in which emotional healing is most accessible is not when we are distracted, performing, or managing. It is in the spaces between, the moments of quiet, of stillness, of transition. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina has studied what she calls the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. Her research shows that even brief periods of calm and openness, not happiness, simply safety and rest, broaden the cognitive and emotional bandwidth available to a person. In those moments, the nervous system has the resources to revisit and complete what it could not process while under pressure. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, running from the brainstem through the heart, phalanx, and abdomen, is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system. When it is well toned and active, it promotes calm, emotional flexibility, and recovery from stress. When it is underactive, as it often is in people who chronically suppress or avoid emotional experience, the body lingers in low-grade activation, unable to fully downshift. Research has shown that certain behaviors meaningfully increase vagal tone. Slow, deep breathing, gentle humming, cold water on the face, and, particularly relevant tonight, the act of lying still and allowing the body to rest without agenda. The amygdala, so often described as the brain's alarm system, is also a learning organ. Every emotional experience it processes teaches it something about the world. What is safe? What requires caution? What can be released? When emotional experiences are processed fully, the amygdala updates its models. When they are avoided or suppressed, the amygdala retains its original alarm setting, unchanged, unmodified, still signaling concern from situations that may have long since passed. Emotional healing is, in part, a process of re-educating the amygdala by giving it new experiences of safety within the context of old feelings. Crying is one of the most direct and least appreciated mechanisms through which the emotional stress cycle can find its way toward completion. Research by Ad Vingerholtz at Tilburg University and colleagues has shown that crying in a safe context, with emotional support nearby, is more likely to be followed by a sense of relief than crying alone in distress or shame. The physiological effects are still being studied. Emotional tears appear to release endorphins and oxytocin and may carry stress-related chemicals out of the body. What the research makes clear is that the context matters as much as the tears themselves. A cry that is allowed, witnessed, and not interrupted is more likely to help the cycle complete than one cut short by self-judgment or isolation. Physical movement is another behavioral pathway through which the emotional stress cycle can complete. Not necessarily intense exercise, though that has its own benefits, but the kind of movement that discharges activation from the nervous system. Shaking, trembling, dancing, walking, stretching. Trauma researcher Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing, observed that animals in the wild naturally tremble and shake after a frightening event. This is the body's discharge mechanism. In humans, we have largely stopped allowing this response, treating involuntary shaking as something to be controlled rather than something to be permitted. When we stop interfering, the body often completes the discharge on its own. Rest without sleep, simply lying still, eyes closed, without agenda, activates a physiological state that overlaps significantly with the early stages of sleep onset. Neuroscience research has shown that even wakeful rest following an emotional or cognitive experience improves the consolidation and resolution of that experience, a process distinct from the broader soothing that calm and openness provide. This is why many people report that a difficult feeling seems lighter after they have simply laid down for a while. Not because time has passed, but because the brain has used that stillness to do something useful with what it was holding. Mindfulness, the practice of bringing deliberate, non-judgmental awareness to present moment experience, has accumulated significant neuroscientific support over the past 2 decades. Functional MRI studies show that regular mindfulness practice thickens the prefrontal cortex, reduces amygdala reactivity, and strengthens the connection between the two. But mindfulness is often misunderstood as a relaxation technique. At its functional core, it is a behavior that stops the behavioral interruption of emotional experience. By observing thoughts and feelings without immediately acting on them, suppressing them, or escaping from them, mindfulness allows the emotional cycle to proceed at its own pace, which is precisely what the brain needs. Expressive writing, the practice of writing freely and honestly about emotional experiences, was first studied systematically by psychologist James Pennebaker at the University of Texas. His research found that people who wrote about their deepest emotional experiences for 15 to 20 minutes over several days showed improvements in immune function, fewer medical visits, reduced anxiety, and greater psychological well-being compared to control groups. Subsequent research has replicated these findings across hundreds of studies. Writing does not merely provide an outlet, it structures the emotional narrative, giving it a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is precisely the arc the brain needs in order to file an experience as completed. The concept of emotional completion is central to understanding why these behaviors matter. An emotion is physiologically complete when the body has returned to its pre-activation baseline, heart rate settled, breathing slow, muscle tension released, stress hormones gradually clearing from the bloodstream. Many people never reach this completion because they interrupt the process before it arrives. They distract themselves at the peak of a feeling, suppress the body's signals, or cut the experience short because it becomes uncomfortable. What remains is an emotion that is partially processed, present enough to generate continued physiological cost, but not fully experienced enough to resolve. Somatic markers, a concept developed by neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, are the body-based signals that accompany emotional states and inform decision-making. These are the gut feelings, the chest tightenings, the inexplicable senses of dread or rightness that precede conscious reasoning. Damasio's research showed that people with damage to the brain regions that integrate somatic markers make significantly worse decisions, not because their logic is impaired, but because they cannot feel their way through complexity. Behaviors that chronically suppress or numb emotional experience also suppress access to somatic markers, quietly degrading the quality of emotional and practical decision-making over time. Compassion, both toward others and toward oneself, has been identified as a neurobiologically active behavior with measurable effects on emotional healing. Research by Kristin Neff at the University of Texas at Austin and Paul Gilbert at the University of Derby has shown that self-compassion activates the mammalian caregiving system in the brain, the same neural circuitry involved in soothing a distressed child. When this system is active, it produces oxytocin and opioids that directly counteract the stress response, self-criticism, and self-judgment. By contrast, activate the threat system, maintaining the physiological state that prevents emotional completion, prolonged grief disorder, formerly called complicated grief, is now recognized in the DSM-5-TR as a distinct clinical condition, formally acknowledged in 2022. It is characterized by an ongoing, impairing grief response that has not completed its natural course, typically more than 12 months after a significant loss. Research has identified behavioral avoidance of grief-related thoughts and reminders as one of the primary maintaining factors of prolonged grief. The grief has not been processed, not because it is too large, but because the person has consistently interrupted the processing behaviors that would allow it to complete. The treatment involves, carefully and gently, resuming contact with the avoided experience. The concept of window of tolerance, developed by Daniel Siegel and expanded by Pat Ogden and others, describes the zone of physiological and emotional activation within which a person can function most effectively when emotions become too intense. A person moves above the window into overwhelm, panic, or dissociation when emotions are too suppressed. A person moves below the window into numbness, disconnection, and flatness. Emotional healing happens within the window, where feelings are present enough to be processed, but not so intense that the nervous system collapses into shutdown. Many healing behaviors involve gently expanding the width of this window over time. Nature exposure has emerging evidence as a behavioral intervention that directly supports emotional regulation and recovery. A study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that a 90-minute walk in a natural environment reduced activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex, the region associated with repetitive negative thinking and rumination, compared to walking in an urban environment. Separate research from the University of Michigan showed that even brief exposures to natural settings improved attention, reduced cortisol, and promoted emotional recovery following stressful experiences. Nature does not distract us from our emotions. It appears to provide a physiological context in which they can settle. This evidence, accumulating across behavioral neuroscience, psychophysiology, and clinical psychology, suggests a coherent and quietly significant idea. Emotional healing is not something we do. It is something we allow. The behaviors that support healing are, at their core, behaviors of permission. Permission to feel, to cry, to shake, to rest, to write, to speak, and the behaviors that obstruct healing are, at their core, behaviors of prevention. Prevention of the body's natural completion mechanisms from running their course. We are not broken. We are interrupted. And the path forward begins with stopping the interruption. You're still here, still listening, still somewhere between thinking and resting. Take one slow breath. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do tonight. We'll keep going together. Gently. When we stop a behavior that has been interrupting emotional healing, the first thing that often happens is uncomfortable. The feeling that was being avoided becomes temporarily more present. This is not evidence that stopping was a mistake. It is evidence that the emotional process is resuming. Researchers call this an extinction burst, an initial intensification that occurs when an avoidance behavior is discontinued. The nervous system, encountering what it had been moving away from, may respond with more intensity before it finds its way to settle. This phase, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of completion. The discomfort is not the wound, it is the wound healing. Acceptance, a concept central to acceptance and commitment therapy developed by Stephen Hayes, is not the same as resignation or approval. It is the willingness to be in contact with an experience without fighting it, escaping it, or trying to make it different than it is. Neuroscientific research supporting ACT-based interventions has shown that when people adopt an acceptance stance toward difficult emotions, the physiological activation associated with those emotions decreases more quickly than when they attempt to suppress or control them. Acceptance removes the second layer of suffering, the struggle against the feeling, and allows the first layer to complete its natural course. The insula, a region of the brain buried within the lateral sulcus, is critically involved in interoception, emotional awareness, and the integration of bodily and emotional experience. Research has shown that the insula is activated when people consciously acknowledge and feel their emotions, and that this activation is associated with more rapid emotional processing and recovery. Behaviors that promote insular engagement, mindful body awareness, slow breathing, gentle physical attention, support the completion of the emotional cycle. Behaviors that suppress interoceptive awareness, numbing, dissociation, compulsive distraction, reduce insular engagement, and slow the healing process. Gratitude, not as a forced positivity practice, but as a genuine orientation toward what is present and valued, has demonstrated neurobiological effects relevant to emotional healing. Research by Robert Emmons at UC Davis and Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania showed that regular gratitude practice increases activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, enhances sleep quality, reduces inflammatory markers, and shifts the nervous system toward parasympathetic dominance. Importantly, gratitude does not suppress difficult emotions. It widens the emotional field in which they exist, providing a physiological context of safety and sufficiency within which the healing process can proceed. Music has a direct effect on the autonomic nervous system and, by extension, on the emotional processing cycle. Research consistently shows that slow, gentle music, particularly music with a tempo around 60 beats per minute, synchronizes with the body's natural physiological rhythms, reducing heart rate, lowering cortisol, and activating the parasympathetic state. This is not merely a mood effect. It is a physiological shift in the context in which emotional experience occurs. Music that is chosen with care and listened to attentively, rather than used as background noise to avoid silence, can serve as a behavioral support for emotional completion. Safe social connection, being genuinely seen by another person without judgment, activates the ventral vagal pathway and triggers the release of oxytocin. This neurochemical and physiological state is one of the most powerful contexts for emotional healing that the human system has available. Research on attachment theory and adult relationships consistently shows that people who have access to at least one emotionally safe relationship recover from difficult experiences more readily than those who are isolated. The healing is not caused by what the other person says. It is caused by the physiological co-regulation that occurs in their safe presence. Breathwork, conscious manipulation of the breathing pattern, is one of the most direct voluntary pathways to parasympathetic activation available to humans. The diaphragm is uniquely connected to the vagus nerve, and slow, deep, diaphragmatic breathing activates the vagal brake, the mechanism by which the parasympathetic system slows the heart and body toward calm. Research published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience has shown that slow breathing at approximately 5 to 6 breaths per minute produces measurable reductions in anxiety, improvements in heart rate variability, and increased activity in prefrontal cortex regions associated with emotional regulation. The breath is the only part of the autonomic nervous system that can be voluntarily controlled, and that access is always available. Creative expression, drawing, painting, writing, singing, dancing, engages neural pathways that are not primarily linguistic. Many emotional experiences, particularly early ones, or those that carry significant weight, are encoded in the brain in nonverbal, sensory, and somatic forms. Talk therapy, while valuable, sometimes cannot access these encodings directly. Creative expression provides an alternative channel, one that can allow emotional material to surface and be processed through image, sound, or movement. Research supporting art therapy, music therapy, and movement-based therapies shows meaningful effects on emotional healing across a range of clinical populations. The practice of doing nothing, of sitting or lying without stimulation, without productivity, without agenda, is among the most counterintuitive and most gentle behaviors for emotional healing. Neuroscience research from Mary Helen Imordino Yang at the University of Southern California has shown that undirected rest periods activate a specific neural mode associated with moral development, narrative identity, and emotional integration. When the mind is given permission to wander without destination, it tends to gravitate toward unresolved emotional material and process it quietly. This is not distraction. This is, paradoxically, one of the most active forms of emotional work the brain performs. It simply looks like nothing from the outside. Halfway through our journey, the answer is already forming. The behaviors that heal emotions share a common quality. They allow the nervous system to complete what it started, and the behaviors that obstruct healing share a common quality too. They stop the process before it arrives where it was going. This is not a moral failing frict. These interrupting behaviors were learned, often in environments where completing an emotional cycle was not safe, not permitted, or not modeled. The capacity to stop these behaviors and allow something else, something the body already knows how to do, is not about willpower. It is about understanding. And understanding is exactly what tonight is for. The memory you believe most strongly is actually reconstructed each time you recall it. Right now, your brain is rewriting itself, and tonight is part of that draft. Every time you rest, the brain is gently revising the emotional weight of what you have carried, not erasing, revising, finding which parts need to remain and which have already served their purpose. The feelings you arrived with tonight have already begun to shift, very slightly, simply by being acknowledged, simply by being here, in a room this quiet, at an hour this still. We'll continue the journey now. When we stop ruminating, the brain does not simply go quiet. It redirects. Research shows that when repetitive negative thinking is interrupted, through mindful awareness, gentle redirection, or simple rest, the default mode network begins to engage in a more restorative form of self-reflection, narrative integration, the process of weaving disparate emotional experiences into a coherent personal story. This integration is how memories become manageable, how difficult experiences find their meaning, and how the past gradually loses the power to activate the present-day nervous system as strongly as it once did. Stopping avoidance does not require confronting the avoided thing all at once. Gradual exposure, approaching difficult, emotional material in small, manageable doses, is the mechanism underlying many effective psychological treatments. The nervous system learns safety incrementally. Each small contact with a feared emotional experience that ends without catastrophe teaches the amygdala something new. This feeling does not undo me. Over time, these small lessons accumulate into a fundamentally revised emotional relationship. Not fearlessness, but tolerance. And tolerance is enough for healing to proceed. The gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication system between the enteric nervous system in the gastrointestinal tract and the central nervous system, plays a role in emotional experience that researchers are still exploring. Approximately 90% of the fibers in the vagus nerve carry information upward from the body to the brain, not downward. This means the gut is constantly informing the emotional brain about its state. Chronic emotional suppression and stress alter the gut microbiome in ways that feed back into increased anxiety and mood dysregulation. Emotional healing has a digestive dimension that is increasingly difficult to overlook. Touch, appropriate, consensual physical contact, is one of the most direct activators of the oxytocin system and the vagal pathway. Research from Tiffany Field at the Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami has documented that gentle touch reduces cortisol, lowers heart rate, and increases parasympathetic tone across populations, ranging from premature infants to elderly adults. In the absence of human touch, certain alternatives have shown measurable physiological effects. Weighted blankets, self-compassion touch exercises, and slow, deliberate self-massage. The body responds to signals of safety regardless of their source. It has been designed to respond this way. When we stop intellectualizing and simply stay with a feeling, without analyzing it, categorizing it, or building a framework around it, something neurologically distinct happens. Research using real-time functional MRI has shown that sitting with an emotional experience in this way, without cognitive distance, activates the right hemisphere more strongly and produces patterns of neural activity associated with emotional insight. The moment when a feeling that was previously opaque becomes clearer. Insight is not a product of more thinking about an emotion. It is often a product of less The nervous system is not fixed. It is, as neuroscientist Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has documented extensively, trainable. The patterns of neural activity associated with emotional reactivity, avoidance, and suppression can shift with consistent practice of alternative behaviors. Davidson's research on neuroplasticity and contemplative practice shows that 8 weeks of consistent mindfulness practice produces measurable changes in prefrontal asymmetry, a reliable neural signature of emotional well-being. The brain does not simply react to emotional experience. It is continuously reshaped by the behaviors we bring to that experience, night after night, moment after moment. Humor, not deflection or sarcasm, which are forms of avoidance, but genuine laughter arising from a felt sense of lightness, activates the ventral vagal complex and produces a parasympathetic cascade similar to safe social contact. Research shows that laughter reduces cortisol, increases pain tolerance, and creates a brief but measurable physiological window of emotional openness. In this sense, the ability to find something gently funny is not separate from emotional healing. It is one of its softer pathways, a moment when the nervous system relaxes its vigilance enough for something to move through, stopping the behavior of self-criticism, the internal voice that narrates our difficulties, judges our feelings, and catalogues our shortcomings, changes the neurochemical environment of the brain in ways that directly support healing. Self-criticism activates the brain's threat circuitry, producing cortisol and maintaining the nervous system in a state of defensive vigilance. Self-compassion, treating oneself with the same warmth one would offer a trusted friend, activates the soothing circuitry, producing oxytocin and reducing inflammatory markers. The emotional healing environment is biochemically different in self-compassion than in self-criticism. The words we speak to ourselves matter at a cellular level. A felt sense of meaning, connection to something larger than oneself through purpose, community, or spiritual practice, in whatever form that takes for a given person, has measurable psychological and physiological correlates in the research literature. Studies from Harvard Medical School and other institutions have found that people who maintain a regular meaning-making practice show lower rates of depression, greater resilience, reduced physiological stress markers, and greater capacity for emotional recovery following adversity. The mechanism appears to involve both the social dimensions of such practices and the neurobiological effects of a consistent orientation toward acceptance, belonging, and purpose. Sleep. Then we return to it again because the research keeps returning to it. A 2024 study published in Nature Mental Health reinforced what earlier work had been building toward. REM sleep is not merely beneficial for emotional processing. It is necessary. Participants who were selectively deprived of REM sleep showed meaningfully impaired ability to distinguish between concerning and neutral social cues the following day, increased amygdala reactivity, and reduced prefrontal modulation of emotional response. In other words, without adequate REM, the emotional brain becomes less discerning, more reactive, and less capable of completing the processing that was interrupted the night before. Tonight matters. This hour matters. The behavior of articulating an experience to another person, speaking it aloud in the presence of a listening other, produces neural effects that internal processing alone cannot fully replicate. Research on narrative therapy and interpersonal neurobiology, particularly from Daniel Siegel's work, shows that speaking an experience to an attuned other activates neural integration across the left and right hemispheres, connecting the verbal analytical left brain with the emotional somatic right brain. This integration is one of the mechanisms through which painful memories lose their fragmentation and become coherent, manageable parts of a person's story rather than isolated emotional intrusions. The behavior of waiting, not anxious waiting, but patient, trusting waiting, is perhaps the most quietly difficult behavior of all. Emotional healing does not operate on demand. It has its own pace, governed by neural processes, physiological cycles, and the slow work of integration and recalibration. Many people, when healing does not arrive on schedule, interpret the delay as evidence that something is different about them. But the research suggests otherwise. Grief, for example, follows a trajectory that is broadly predictable in its direction and highly variable in its pace. The healing is happening whether or not it is visible yet. One of the most gentle and underutilized behaviors supporting emotional healing is simple acknowledgement, saying to oneself, with genuine conviction, "This feeling is real. It makes sense, and it is allowed to be here." Research on validation, both external validation from others and internal self-validation, shows that the act of acknowledging an emotional experience without judgment reduces its intensity more effectively than attempting to reason it away or suppress it. The emotion is not looking for a debate. It is looking for recognition, and recognition, even when it comes from oneself, in a quiet room, in a still hour, is enough to allow something to begin releasing. The immune system and the emotional system are more deeply connected than medicine once believed. Psychoneuroimmunology, the field studying the connections between psychological processes and the nervous and immune systems, has established that chronic emotional suppression and unresolved stress elevate inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These inflammatory markers are associated not only with physical illness, but with increased risk of depression, anxiety, and impaired emotional regulation. Resolving emotional tension through any of the behavioral pathways we have explored reduces this inflammatory pattern over time. Emotional healing is, in a very real sense, also physical healing. We now understand something that the science has been assembling piece by careful piece. There is no behavior that heals emotions that does not involve some form of stopping the running, stopping the managing, stopping the distraction. Every effective pathway to emotional completion, whether it is mindfulness, breathwork, expressive writing, social connection, sleep, movement, or simple rest, creates a space in which the interrupted process can resume. The healing was never absent. It was waiting, and the moment we stop interrupting it, it continues exactly where it left off. Compassionate witnessing. Observing one's own emotional experience with the same gentle, non-reactive curiosity one might bring to watching clouds move across a sky is a behavioral stance that has measurable effects on emotional recovery. Research on observer perspective in emotional processing suggests that the meta-awareness of watching one's experience, rather than being completely absorbed in it, reduces emotional reactivity and facilitates integration. The observer is not detached. They are present, but their presence includes a quality of spaciousness, a recognition that the feeling is an experience being had, not a truth that defines everything. The relationship between physical posture and emotional state is bidirectional. Research has consistently shown that open, soft, grounded postures, lying still, sitting with a relaxed spine, allowing the chest to soften, activate parasympathetic responses, and reduce defensive emotional activation. The posture you are in right now, still and horizontal, is already supporting the emotional processing your brain is attempting to do. Your body knew before your mind did. It brought you here, and it is already participating. Slow, deliberate eating, present and attentive rather than automatic and distracted, is one of the more unexpected behaviors with relevance to emotional regulation. Mindful eating engages the interoceptive system, activates parasympathetic digestion, and creates moments of genuine sensory presence during which the body has access to its own signals. Research on mindful eating has shown secondary benefits, including reduced stress eating, improved emotional awareness, and lower cortisol. The behavior of slowing down, even when the slowing is only in relation to a meal, gently trains the nervous system in the direction of presence and completion. Forgiveness, not for the benefit of the person who caused harm, but as a behavioral practice the forgiver undertakes for their own physiological health, has compelling research support. Studies from Fred Luskin at Stanford's Forgiveness Project found that forgiveness interventions reduced trait, anger, lowered blood pressure, decreased cortisol and adrenaline, and improved measures of well-being across diverse populations. Forgiveness does not require approval of what happened. It requires the decision to stop paying the physiological cost of carrying ongoing resentment, a cost the body pays in chronic inflammatory activation, not the person who is resented. The period just before sleep, the hypnagogic state, in which waking awareness begins to soften into dreaming, is a neurologically distinctive window for emotional processing. In this state, the brain produces theta waves, and the prefrontal cortex begins to reduce its regulatory activity, allowing more associative, image-based, and emotionally fluid thinking. Research has shown that emotional material encountered or contemplated during this window is processed differently than material encountered in full waking consciousness. With less defensive filtering and more integrative flexibility, this is, in part, why listening to gentle, reflective content as sleep approaches can facilitate emotional processing that ordinary waking attention sometimes resists. The act of letting go, so often spoken of as though it were a single, decisive moment, is, neurobiologically, a gradual and iterative process. Each time the brain encounters a painful memory or emotional pattern and experiences a moment of safety in its presence, the neural connections sustaining that pattern are gently revised through a process called memory reconsolidation. Each subsequent encounter offers another small opportunity for revision over many encounters, across many nights and many quiet hours. What once held intensity gradually loses its charge, not through forgetting, but through repeated contact in conditions of safety. Letting go is not an event. It is a practice. Silence, genuine silence, or near silence, has a measurable effect on the brain that differs from both sleep and waking activity. A study published in Brain Structure and Function found that 2 hours of silence per day promoted neurogenesis in the hippocampus, the region responsible for learning, memory consolidation, and emotional context. The hippocampus is also central to the processing of emotional memories and their eventual integration into a person's life narrative. Silence, in this sense, is not merely the absence of noise. It is an active biological condition in which something gentle and necessary is being built. Consistent sleep timing, going to sleep and waking at the same hour each day, is one of the most impactful behavioral choices for emotional regulation available to anyone. Circadian rhythm research from Russell Foster at the University of Oxford and others has shown that irregular sleep timing disrupts the timing of REM sleep, reduces its total duration, and impairs the nightly emotional processing that depends on it. The emotional healing that sleep makes possible is most effective when sleep occurs at a consistent time, long enough for multiple REM cycles, and in an environment quiet and dark enough for the cycles to complete without interruption. The relationship between physical pain and emotional pain shares more neural substrate than was once believed. Neuroimaging research has shown that social rejection, grief, and emotional loss activate many of the same brain regions as physical pain, including the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. This is not metaphor. Emotional pain is a distinct form of pain that the brain processes through overlapping circuits. And just as physical pain requires rest, reduced activity, and supportive conditions to heal, emotional pain also has optimal healing conditions. Conditions that the behaviors we have been exploring throughout this night are designed to create. By now, you may have felt it, not just understood it, something in the body that arrived slightly differently after Fact 40 than it did before. Not because the words changed anything on their own, but because understanding and body sometimes move together, quietly. When we stop asking them to hurry, the answer to tonight's question was never missing. It was simply waiting for a moment of stillness in which it could be recognized, and a moment exactly like this one, lying still, breathing slowly, in a room that has finally gone quiet, is all it was ever waiting for. Sleep doesn't come when you try to sleep. It comes when you stop trying. This is exactly that moment. Let go, not because you have finished everything, or resolved everything, or understood everything, but because the body has done its work tonight. The brain has been listening to every fact, quietly reorganizing, quietly revising. The nervous system has been settling, breath by breath, toward the parasympathetic state it was always moving toward. You don't need to hold the journey. It has already been held for you. We'll continue with the final facts now. The emotions we have been most hesitant about are often the ones closest to completion. Discomfort does not mean the feeling is harmful. It often means it is almost finished. The body moves toward resolution, not away from it, and near is allowed. Grief is not the absence of love. It is love with nowhere to go. When grief is allowed to move, to be felt, wept, spoken, held, it does not dissolve the love. It honors it. The love remains. The acute pain, given time and permission, gradually softens into something quieter, something that can be carried gently. The body does not require explanation. It does not need to know why you are sad, or unsettled, or carrying something unnamed before it will begin healing. The healing begins when you stop preventing it. Explanation may follow in time, but the body moves first. And the understanding often comes after. Every person who has ever moved through something difficult has done so through the same mechanism. They eventually allowed themselves to feel what they had been moving away from. Not all at once, not perfectly, but eventually, in some moment of rest, the feeling was permitted to arrive. And arriving, it moved through, as it was always designed to do. The emotional cycle that was interrupted long ago is not lost. It is paused, neurologically, emotionally, physiologically. The body holds the pause point with remarkable patience, and when conditions of safety return, the process resumes, sometimes years later, exactly where it left off. Nothing is too old to heal. The body does not keep track of time the way the mind does. Nighttime carries a different quality of emotional permission than daytime. The social demands are quiet. The performing self is resting. The defenses, tired from a long day of vigilance, have softened. This is part of why the night can feel emotionally heavier than the day, and also part of why it is more healing. The feelings that surface now are the ones that have been waiting for exactly this softening. The brain's capacity for emotional healing does not diminish with age. Research consistently shows that older adults demonstrate greater emotional regulation, more refined ability to identify and process complex emotions, and lower rates of certain anxiety disorders than younger adults. The capacity for healing accumulates with time and experience, not the reverse. Whatever has not yet found resolution has not been waiting for lack of time. It has been waiting for conditions. And conditions can be created at any age, in any moment. You do not need to understand an emotion to let it pass. Understanding is one pathway, but it is not the only one. Sometimes the body heals through movement, sometimes through tears, sometimes through music, sometimes through the simple accumulation of safe, still nights that slowly reassure the nervous system that it is, finally, allowed to release. The behaviors that interrupt emotional healing are not permanent. They were learned, and they can be unlearned, not through force or effort, but through the gradual introduction of new experiences. Each time you rest, instead of ruminating, each time you feel instead of numbing, each time you breathe instead of tensing, you are offering your nervous system a new reference. And nervous systems update remarkably readily when given consistent new evidence. There is no correct timeline for healing. There is only the timeline the nervous system requires. Given its history, its resources, and the conditions it has been offered, the healing is happening whether or not it is visible yet, and this night is part of that process. Quietly, without announcement, already underway. Tonight, simply by being still, by not running, not distracting, not managing, you have created one of the most healing conditions available to the human nervous system. The absence of interruption is itself an act of care, and the body knows. When the emotional cycle completes, what follows is not emptiness. It is a quality of lightness that is difficult to describe and unmistakable when it arrives. A sense of being slightly less burdened, slightly more present, slightly more available to the moment at hand. It does not announce itself. It simply is. One morning or afternoon or quiet night, undeniably, here, the heart, which the body's emotional experience moves through most visibly, is not a passive recipient of what the brain decides to feel. It sends more signals to the brain than it receives. The emotional body is a conversation, one that becomes richer, gentler, and more coherent when we stop interrupting it. The heart has its own intelligence, and it has been patient with us. Sleep is coming now, or has already come for some of you. Either is fine. The mind that drifted into rest was still receiving. The nervous system that slipped into sleep while the words were still present was already doing what tonight was designed to support. There is no way to do this wrong. There is only more or less stillness, more or less permission, and both directions lead. Eventually, somewhere softer than where we started. So, what if the habits you use to manage your emotions are the very things quietly keeping you from healing? They already are. For many people, and the response to that truth is not guilt, it is not self-judgment. It is simply information. Information that arrives gently in a quiet room, at the edge of sleep, exactly when the nervous system is most ready to receive it and begin, without urgency, to do something different. The word heal comes from the Old English halen, meaning to make whole, not to erase, not to return to what was before, but to integrate, to weave the torn pieces into something that holds together, that can bear weight again. Emotional healing does not produce a person who was never hurt. It produces a person who has been hurt and processed and gently expanded by what they moved through. Wholeness includes the healed places. The behaviors explored tonight: mindfulness, self-compassion, expressive writing, safe connection, breathwork, sleep, rest, movement, acceptance, are not treatments. They are permissions. Permissions to let the body do what it already knows how to do, without interference, without management, without the constant effort of staying one step ahead of what you feel, whatever you came in with tonight. Whatever was underneath the quiet, waiting at the edge of awareness, has been sitting with you through every fact, every meditation, every slow breath, the process of simply acknowledging that it is there, without trying to fix it or understand it or make it stop, is one of the most generous things you can offer a nervous system that has been working hard for a very long time. The emotional healing we have been describing is not a destination, it is a practice of returning again and again to the conditions in which healing is possible. Every quiet night is a return. Every moment of genuine stillness is a return. Every breath taken without urgency is a return. The practice does not end, but it gets easier, and the weight, carried for a long time, becomes gradually, almost imperceptibly, lighter. And finally, you were not designed to carry your emotions indefinitely. You were designed to feel them, to move through them, and to arrive on the other side, changed, perhaps, but not undone. The system built into you for doing exactly this is intact. It has never stopped working. It has simply, at times, been interrupted. And the interruption, the very one this night has been about, is something you can, one quiet hour at a time, choose to let end. And so our quiet journey through emotional healing comes gently to a close. We began with the discovery that emotions are full-body biological events designed to move, and that the stress response cycle, when it is permitted to complete, leaves the body calmer and the nervous system restored. We moved through the research on rumination and suppression, on avoidance and numbing, on projection and perfectionism and busyness. And then, in fact, 40, we arrived at something that has stayed with us through every fact that followed. Emotional healing is not something we do. It is something we allow. The behaviors that support it are behaviors of permission, and the ones that obstruct it are behaviors of prevention. We ended with the understanding that the emotional cycle interrupted long ago has not disappeared. It is paused, and the pause can end tonight. In conditions like these, still, unheld, and finally, only yours. The same forces shaping the way a wound closes in the body are shaping the way emotion moves through the nervous system. The body heals toward wholeness when conditions allow, and tonight, you created those conditions. Much of this work happens in silence, in the dark, in the spaces between one thought and the next. The nervous system is patient. It has been patient for a long time. By pausing to notice, you have already begun. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about consciousness itself. Yours, mine, everyone listening, all awareness everywhere, perhaps all connected in ways we don't yet understand. Think about the unity of every feeling that has ever moved through a human body on a quiet night like this one. Every grief that completed, every tension that finally released into sleep. You are not alone in this. You never were. Let your entire being dissolve into the quiet that your particular kind of mind has been searching for all day. Into the dark that is not empty, but full of everything that no longer needs to be held. Prepare for deep sleep. No boundaries left, only peace. If this gentle journey through the science of emotional healing helped you feel a little less alone tonight, consider sharing it softly with someone who is also carrying something and might not yet know that the body already knows the way through. One quiet permission at a time. The emotional cycles within you are still unfolding right now, without your effort, without your witness. You don't need to hold any of this. It was never yours to carry alone. You've traveled inward tonight. Through corridors most people never pause to notice. You touched the architecture of how healing actually works and found it more patient, more forgiving, more available than it seemed. You can allow these thoughts of emotional healing to fade now, like the last image of a dream at dawn. Present, then softer, then simply part of everything, leaving only the quiet, unheld calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if all you have been carrying today is being sorted by careful, invisible hands, and is simply setting itself down. If sleep comes, let it carry you the way integration does, not with force, but with quiet intention, into a realm where time and weight no longer matter. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, your nervous system will still be there, still tending, still weaving, still becoming. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, gentle explorer, and remember, your mind is always rewriting toward the light. Good night.